several of you picked questions, and I'll go through them in some kind of orders. Most of these I'll have to kind of answer, but I want you to still add in, push back, you know the rules. I don't have to. What are you guys doing?
We don't have Steve jacket yet. It's Steve jacket.
My two dogs are driving me nuts. Okay, the first question was, I've always been interested in the concept of Christ dying for our sins. How did this idea begin, and why did he have to do this? Now, we talked about this a little bit, I think, the first time, but let me just offer my brief summary. I don't think he had to die. I think he chose to.
Make a statement.
Because if he had to and he didn't choose to, then don't talk to me about sacrifice. For me, it's very important that Jesus chose out of obedience and out of faithfulness, because it strikes me, and you've heard me say this before. I mean, my Lord, we've been around each other way too long, and you move your lips when I talk. But he had two choices: put up or shut up. And if he remained faithful to what he had been saying, to what he believed God wanted him to be saying all along, he had to put up. If he wanted to avoid the cross, he had to shut up. And so I really think that for me, and I don't make anybody else do this, but I have to make peace with what I have to make peace with. And for me, the important aspect of that whole event is Jesus' faithfulness and obedience to what he believed. Questions, comments, additions? Yeah, like I say, we had fought through this before, but just to re-summarize. Then secondly, being raised Catholic, I was presented at every Mass with the communion part involving the bread and wine being transformed by the priest into the actual body and blood of Christ. How could this possibly be true? Well, for us, it isn't. Okay. But what I think is the important element here is that for all who celebrate Eucharist or communion, they believe Jesus is present in the sacrament. The difference is Catholics will try to believe, that he is physically present. We believe that he is spiritually present, and that the elements are reminders of his physical presence. And further back, reminders of his obedience and his faithfulness. Okay. By the way, that there are some Catholics who will tell you that that Protestant communion doesn't count, and the reason why it doesn't count is because we broke the chain of ordination. We're not directly connected to Peter anymore, and so we don't have the power to change the elements, wine and bread, into blood and to body and blood. That's what some of them will tell you. Fine, live like you got to live. I mean, but they will say that y'all don't believe in communion. We believe in our Eucharist. We believe in Eucharist a lot. I wish we would do it more than we do. But by the way, during some of my brief stints at the Episcopal Church, I really enjoy the fact that they're going to have communion you know, if on any occasion, almost. It's central to the service. And by the way, the difference between Episcopalians and Methodists, besides the fact that the Episcopalians dress better, I mean, the priests do. I mean, they got some good looking stuff. I mean, they really do. But the other difference is that in Methodist worship, preaching is central. In Episcopal worship, the liturgy and the Eucharist are central. And they'll run, the first time I ran into this is when we were having, every week, several of the pastors would get together, St. David's, First Baptist, Central Christian, St. Martin's, and me. And one time I asked David, who was at St. David's, which I thought was interesting, I said, well, how do y'all sort out the preaching? He said, oh, we just rotate around. It really doesn't matter. And that was such an alien concept to me, because in my mind, being born bred Methodist, the preacher's personality, for better or worse, shapes the service. Okay? For them, the liturgy and the Eucharist shape the service. And so I've preached at St. Matthew's 4 or 5 times. They don't care about having me there because, you know, I'm not the show, to put it bluntly. The show is, the main reason to gather is the Eucharist. And I don't know that that's a bad thing in retrospect. But that's off the subject, and that will not, as I say, that won't be on the final. Anything about that?
I had an interesting.
Hi, Kathleen. We were talking about you in your absence. Go ahead.
Here I am. I had an interesting take on the difference between Catholic and Protestant Eucharist. One year, when I took the confirmation class out to some big Catholic church out on 620, and at the time they were famous for their, I guess it was a folk mass targeted to youth on Sunday evenings. And that's what we went to. And the person who met with us afterward was this young guy whose name I can't remember, who was a student at St. Ed's. He was, of course, Catholic. He was their youth director. And but he had done an internship with us for some class he was taking at St. Ed's. So after I had explained to the kids, you know, that when it's time to go get communion, we don't go. And maybe we can talk about that afterward. And I probably said a little something. But anyway, we were gathered with him after the service, and the first rattle out of the box, David Johnson, Glenn and Debbie's son, said, "Why couldn't we have communion?" And Michael was his name, and he said, "Well, I'm going to give you 2 answers. And the first answer is the one I'm supposed to give you." And that
This is the party line. Yeah.
Exactly. That is that because you don't believe in it the same way we do, it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be right for either of us. But he said, I think the real answer is that we think we know the only way to do it, and we don't want anybody else who doesn't agree with that doing it with us.
Hey.
I don't know whatever happened to him. I don't think he was going to.
Well, that kind of honesty will get you in trouble. Huh.
Tom Watkins is still mad that he was best man at his brother's Catholic wedding to a Catholic woman and could not take communion.
Well,
Yeah.
and Robbie told us about a time they went to a Catholic wedding, and Tom just went right up and got communion because he thought he should.
I have a good friend whose teenage daughter had gone to spend the weekend with a Catholic friend. And when she got home, she was telling her mom about it, about going to the mass. And she said that she had gone to communion, and her mom said, you should not have gone to communion. You can't do that. And her teenager's response was, well, I can, and I did.
Yeah.
At Leb Shemaiah, as long as I've been going, they have offered communion
Yeah.
universally. And I've asked beforehand every time there was a new father there, and the answer was the same. All are welcome.
You know,
I remember attending a Catholic service. What surprised me about it is how much it was like our Methodist service, except for that.
Yeah.
But I remember reading there are special dispensations they can make so that you can take it.
I may be saying the same thing that Kathleen is saying and what you are. Penny, I'm sorry to interrupt. I did. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, Penny. Can y'all hear me?
Go ahead.
you're not real clear. Get a little closer or whatever.
Okay, I'll try to do better.
There you go.
Okay, does anyone on this Zoom believe that at the time of the at the time of the Mass, that the bread and wine at service are changed literally into the body and blood of Christ?
No.
Okay, that's why you can't get Catholic communion, because Catholics believe that it is. And if you don't believe that, you shouldn't take Catholic communion.
Well, that's also one of the great motivations they had for years, and it seems to be dying off. That if you miss Mass, you're missing the presence of Christ. The actual presence of Christ. And that's just a second. Come on, guys.
I think it's probably dying off because even young Catholics are very turned off to that idea.
Yeah.
That communion should not be universal for everyone there. But that's the traditional, and that's the Catholic answer.
Oh, yeah. Transubstantiation. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we'll leave the Catholics to live their life and we'll go on with ours. Let's deal with a hard one here, because sadly, I don't have a real good answer. How do you talk to parents and children about suicide? And I have to say, I count myself lucky that in 40 years of ministry, I never once had to deal with suicide. Now, I had to bury an 8-year-old girl from leukemia. I had to bury Jerry and Pam Porter's son. I had, we've done that. But this is a different deal. And were I there, and Taylor and I talked a little bit about it. I just mainly told her, look, you're in an incredibly tough spot here. This is a hard time. And I think you have to be honest about what you know and what you don't know. And I think you have to say, and for God's sake, don't come up with some cheap, theological BS about, well, God needed another little angel or whatever, crap like that.
She did a great job, I thought.
Well, she did. I expect no less anymore.
And was very frank about this was suicide. And
Yeah,
here's,
yeah.
I mean, I appreciated that.
I think you've got to do that. And but you also, from what I understand, I was not there, but what I understand, I think the father was helpful.
What?
He said,
You did a great job.
don't do this, because you need to understand it's not just you. You're taken down with you. You know, we think of suicide as an individual act. It's not. It's a communal act, because you take a whole group with you. They're still there though, and they have to live with it. And there's the element that somehow has to be dealt with, that the people left behind always rationally or irrationally have a sense of guilt.
Yeah.
I had to have been able, there was something I could have done. You know, we want, in the face of tragedy, we always want to believe there's something we could do to fix it. And so there's that has to be dealt with. I don't have, I think you say, and I've talked with several of you about this one. I think you've got to say, you can trust God with your life. You've got to trust him with this. And it's, you know, and don't, it's not God's plan. It's not God's intention. It's not part of some great, magnificent, you know, worked out setting. It's just life, and it's tough. And you've just been through as much as you can go through, almost, and maybe more than you can go through. But you're not alone in this thing. There are those around you, and there's God with you, and that's about all I've got. There are situations that arise where they are simply beyond our ability to rationalize, understand, explain, whatever. And for me, that's one of them. It's not the only one, but it's one of them. And it would, I just think you have to be careful what you say.
I know there's a big thing in the Catholic Church about how sinful suicide is.
Well, yeah.
And I don't think the Methodist Church calls it a sin.
No, I think what we call it, I don't know what, I haven't researched the discipline on this. One of many things that I have not researched the discipline on. But I think if we had to list anything, we would call it what it is. And that's a tragedy. It's a horrible tragedy.
I think there was a
Unfortunately,
point at which Taylor described Miles as a victim.
Yes, we heard that. A victim of suicide. Scott and I heard that. A victim of suicide.
Yeah.
Well, and there are a lot right now. I was in fact on the evening news tonight about these kids going back to school and what the teachers are having to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much more prevalent than it has been in a long time.
Well, if my grandkids are any example, okay, they live for their friends. I went to, Farrah and I went to Grandparents' Day the other day at school. I was in charge because there are 3 grandkids in Michael's family. We divided and, tried to divide and conquer. Well, I got one. She walked up to me and said hello. And then she ran off with her friends. And then she checked back to see that I was still alive. And then she ran off with her friends, Okay, and I say that to say they have been in isolation. And you cannot replace physical proximity with a screen. You just can't, no matter how hard they try. Doctors are soon going to have to figure out a way to surgically remove phones from children's hands because they're, constantly there, and they've probably, grown together after a certain amount of time. But I think that's part of the issue. Is they're at a time when proximity is very important, and they've had 2 years of isolation. That's at least part of it. Yeah, as if teaching wasn't hard enough. Let's just see what else we can do, okay? Just to make it a little tougher. That's what I've got on that. I'll wander on through some stuff here. Okay, this is the long one. Some of you remember it, but I'll read it anyway. Many years ago, Leonard Sweet, former dean of the Divinity School at Drew University, did a preaching mission at FUMC. His sermons were based on his interesting book, The Jesus Prescription for a Healthy Life. Jesus is frequently seen as radical and intense, but Sweet argued that Jesus, 1, laughed a lot, 2, hung out with his friends, 3, took lots of LSD, meaning long, slow distance walk. I hope that's what he meant. Had a welcoming see you at the party attitude, embraced the unknown and unexpected, dealt with unbelievable stress by seeking out solitary and quiet time for himself. Sweet says Jesus would come apart so that he wouldn't come apart. Not bad. And learn to moodle, M-O-O-D-L-E, along the way. How have you, each of you, but John's gone, how have each of you dealt with a lifetime of stress of being a pastor, with must have been lots of wear and tear? Not as much as you might think. There were incredible hard times at points, and I've mentioned some of them, and it usually has to do with trying to deal with tragedy that you just don't have any, that you can't make any real sense out of. Basically, the stress of the job comes in 2 areas: organization and theological disagreement. Organization is bureaucracy, is whatever. The Methodist Church, for better or worse, sadly more worse than better, has always tried to follow a political or industrial model of organization. Ted Richardson, the man who proved that you can be DS forever, and was called the Godfather for a number of reasons, mainly his personality, said that it's just hard, and that every time we come up with an idea, that industry found out quit working about 5 years ago. I have been through them all in 40 years. So there's the organizational structure. The best bit of advice I ever heard came from Chuck Merrill. And Chuck Merrill said, I always tell my wife, don't let me resign from the church during the month of October. And you know what happens in the month of October. Pledge campaigns, election of officers, charge conference, and nothing's coming down the pike, just Christmas, and as long as we got nothing else planned. And the minute I heard him say that, it was like, yeah, and it made me approach October a whole lot differently. We all go through it. So it's the organizational stuff. The other thing is the theological stuff, and the theological stuff is much more personal, because people tend to adopt theologies, and they work out their theologies, and those theologies, because they have worked them out themselves or in conjunction with other people, become very important to them. And so if you disagree or raise any question at all about their theology, it's not really about their theology. It's about them and their value as people. Now, they may not know that intellectually. I mean, they wouldn't say that right off, but the knee-jerk response that you get, or that and it's not just them. I mean, man, I have whiplashed myself into some real bad arguments for no point at all, in the long run, over stuff like that. So that has been the stress and strain, is trying to deal with people who feel alienated simply because you have a different theological perspective than they do. And we're seeing that acted out in the Methodist Church right now. I mean, that's why we're split. It may be about, they think it's about, well, we act like it's about gays. I'm not sure that it is. I think it has something to do with scripture and interpretation and control. And of course, because original sin is alive and well, power. I mean, that's my reading of that. I've been to too many annual conferences that you think are about the issues that we're talking about, and it's really not. It's about my side beating your side. And when we used to have, let's see, any of you ever go to annual conference when it was in La Villita, the La Villita Assembly Hall down there in San Antonio? That would have been probably in the 80s, whatever in there. And it was almost like you could take the first vote and you would know the numbers for the rest of the day. It didn't matter the subject. Let's have lunch, same number of votes. No, let's talk about communists in the school, same number of votes, Well, I mean, it was usually centered around personalities, and I can name two of them because they were friends of mine, and they were on opposite sides. And it really had, and in the long run, I think it had to do with getting elected to General Conference. But see, I'm a cynic. But that's just me. So the stress, you say, okay, and that's the downside. I loved what I did. Okay. I always said, I can do something else. If this doesn't work out, if I'm not happy, if I'm not having a good time, if I don't think I'm doing something worthwhile, I can do something else. My high school counselor tried to talk me out of going into the ministry. She couldn't get over the fact that the guy who won the civics award and the physics award in his senior year wanted to go in the ministry. And by the way, when I preached at my home church 10 years later, she was in the congregation, and when she walked out and shook my hand, she said, well, that was very good. I said, just remember, you tried to talk me out of this. Because I'm a mean and vicious person. I just had to do it. But no, I loved what I did because I like people. And wherever, now I know there's some churches that have a well-earned reputation of being preacher killers.
Preacher what? Sorry?
Preacher killers.
Killers.
At least not if not the preacher themselves, certainly their reputation and their future, which is the same thing. But I never got one of those. And every place I was, there were warm, good friends of mine that would have been friends whether I was their preacher or not. And that went from, my first associate's job to Merchant and Cristobal all the way through. And when when I got to Wesleyan Corpus and then Laurel Heights again, and then here, we had staffs that were in like a very large extended family that I think nurtured each other. And that made it fun. I mean, it was fun. Now, did we have some problems? Heck yeah. But it wasn't, who was it that told me? Oh, yeah, I was remembering a conversation. When I started off as an associate pastor at Laurel Heights in San Antonio, 2 years. Laurel Heights was in the middle of the biggest war, and it was a division between the senior pastor and the choir director, both of whom were incredibly strong personalities. And so when I went back years later as a senior pastor, Farrah was worried about that because she said, I don't know that we want to go back into that or not. I got up there early and I took the choir director out to lunch. And I said, now let's just talk. I said, let's understand that there's going to be occasions when we're going to disagree. But let's understand something. We'll disagree about what we're disagreeing about. We will not disagree about the value of each other. And to his credit, he responded to that. And 4 years in, he said, it was getting near appointment time. And he said, who are we talking to?
What are we hearing?
I don't know. Something's coming in. He said, are they talking about moving you? And I said, no. He said, good, because otherwise I'd have to go talk to the bishop and tell him not to do it. And I've never had to do that before because I've never liked anybody. And he hadn't probably. But anyway, so the job was not hard. Okay, the job could be tough, but it was never hard. Does that make sense? I mean, if you've got a core of people around you that you trust and that you just love being around, then it's not hard. It's just difficult at times. And those are different things entirely to me. Okay. Now, how did I get by? I'd take a month off in the summer and cut cedar. I ran. I played golf. I listened to music. I love humor. Just something to kind of move you away from where you are for a while, you know, so you're not stuck with it. And that's true of any job, any job. If you can't leave it, then you're stuck with it negatively. Question, I mean, any question about any of that? I mean, you know the rules. Okay. When do you feel Jesus or the Holy Spirit present in your life giving you direction? I know it's different for everyone. It varies. Someone asked me a number of people have asked me over the years, because it just, when they first see it, it really makes them crazy, apparently, for a Protestant. When I finish the sermon, I always cross myself. I say, why do you do that? You know, why do you do that? And my answer has always been the same. I said, there have been too many times in the middle of a sermon when I said something that was a whole lot brighter than I was. And I'm serious about that. You know, that sudden click where you go, wait a minute, that wasn't there before. That's part of it. Another part of it is just in writing, it's the same thing. There's just, when you think you're here and you start writing, and all of a sudden you're over here somewhere else in a completely different direction, much more profound than where you were. I've done a little bit of journaling. I'm not disciplined enough to do that on a regular basis, But I remember when I was doing it, there was more than a few occasions when about halfway into whatever I was doing, it got different than I thought it was going to be. And for me, that's what that looks like. Now, one great experience, I have made one trip to the South Rim at Big Bend. And it was the last trip that the colonel took. And we walked up with him, and I walked with him because my excuse was that he was going slow, and I wanted to stay with him, make sure he was going faster than I was, but you know, it made me feel better. And Bert, you know, being with Bert, with that group of guys in a setting that if you have not been there, it's more than you are. And you know it. And it's those kinds of things that enrich my soul. So that's my kind of stuff. Somebody asked, what about prayers and liturgy in the time of Jesus? I'm not real clear on a lot of that, but I can give you a guess. They read the Torah. I mean, that's basically, and the Psalms. You need to be aware of something. Those of us who have to name a psalm will immediately go to the 23rd Psalm because that's the one we had to memorize for cookies at Vacation Bible School. But it's kind of joyful. There's about a third of the Psalms that are not joyful. They're going, you know, wait a minute. My life is trash. Something's got to be better than this. And some of them have a kick at the end where, but I remain faithful. Okay, they've got that. But there's one or two of them that just go, it's like if he was going to put that in, he didn't get to it. And so if they're reading the Psalms in worship, which they were, then you've got a mixed deal. You've got affirmation, but you've also got this, yes, times can be hard and tough and difficult, but God is with us. Now, most of you know that the teaching method was to read the text or to tell the story and then to turn around and say, okay, what does that mean? What did that mean for you? And people would respond. Kathleen, you know more about this than me? I mean, about Jewish worship?
I really don't know that much about it, but I agree with everything you've said.
Well, there you go.
Because the synagogue was a place of teaching primarily.
Yeah.
And because, you know, worship was all about sacrifice, and that only happened at the temple on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the synagogue was all about teaching.
And it wasn't, I don't know if pedantic is the word. It may not be the word. Somebody that's a linguist in the crowd.
Oh.
But it wasn't, here's the answer. It was, okay, here's the story. Now, what do you think this is? Let's all talk about it. And
it was often one question leads to another question,
yes,
to another question.
Yes, absolutely. And somehow we've lost that. What we tend to do too often is to say, well, here's the way it is. Well, we have just separated ourselves from the Jewish part of the Judeo-Christian tradition because they don't do it that way. And I mentioned recently that I think it might have been Leonard Sweet that said that at a Jewish dinner table, a child can say, ask a question. There will never be somebody say, well, the answer from the parent will be, well, that's a good question. They will never say, you should never ask a question like that.
I've taken a couple of classes from a Jewish person on this whole rabbinical way of,
Yeah.
and I've seen the words where they put out a statement. Rabbi so-and-so says this,
Yeah.
but then Rabbi so-and-so said this. And then Rabbi so-and-so, you just kind of go through that, through all these, and you don't really get to any real conclusion.
No, but you see, I think there's two ways to go about this, Penny. One is to hope for an immediate conclusion. And because we're rational, we love that kind of stuff. The problem is that we're in such a hurry to get to the conclusion that we cut off these side tracks. And sometimes the side tracks turn out to be the most interesting.
Right.
When you think of something that you weren't thinking about at that moment. Yeah. And so I was with them for the longest time. I think I wrote, I want bumper sticker answers, and I want them quick, and I want them easy, and I don't want any lack of clarity, subtlety. Forget it. I don't want it. I want answers. Okay. No. If you raise
that kind of discussion in ESL this morning, because we had some extra time, and one of the students says, and I think she's from Thailand, we had China, Venezuela, and it was, what do you think about Ukraine? And so you go off from that, when will it end? Why do you say there won't be a war? So it's that same kind of thing where you have but just going through it, just raising the question.
At least you have to deal with the issue.
Right.
I mean, deal with it as opposed to cut to the chase. We just started reading the Monday night group. It started reading The Civil War as a Theological Crisis. And in the introduction, he talks about the fact there were two problems they had. One, Scripture was their ultimate authority, but it was up to each individual to read it, and because they all believed that Scripture was absolutely clear. All you had to do was read it, and you knew exactly what it meant. Okay. The other thing they believed in was providence. That is, America should have never beaten the British. God must have been on our side. We had all these black people we didn't know what to do with, and then God must have helped Eli Whitney invent the cotton gin. Believe me, you'll find out. Okay, the problem with both of those is they couldn't find agreement on the issue of slavery. But they were also intent on their positions that they couldn't listen to each other. And they were absolutely sure that people holding the other side were anti-God because God believed like they did. That never happens anymore, right?
Sounds familiar.
Anyway, okay, let's see. There's some others because we're running. Somebody said, what about John Wesley and science? My bet is Wesley was a man of his time. If I remember my history right, there was not a great amount of scriptural criticism going on at that particular point in time. The Germans hadn't started upsetting everybody, if I remember right at that point. And some of the really upsetting scientific stuff was still yet to come. So my bet is that Wesley was pretty much a man of his time. But I've got nothing beyond that. And John and I talked about this and we saw it, and neither one of us are serious Wesley scholars, so I can't argue one way or the other on that. But that would be my sense of him. Let's see. Somebody said, what about critical race theory? What do you think Jesus says about critical race? Interestingly enough, critical race theory does not appear in the New Testament anywhere that I can tell, except that it does. I mean, the words aren't there. In any Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, whatever, it's not there. Okay, as near as I can tell. But it's shot through. Because there's a lot between Jesus and the prophets, there's a great deal of discussion of the effect of societal institutions on people, especially the poor. The prophets go absolutely berserk on that, time in and time out. Jesus talks about the poor. I mentioned this to somebody the other night, that the difference between the Beatitude, the difference between the Sermon on the Mount and Sermon on the Plain. Luke's a little bit more pointed. In Matthew, you get blessed are the poor in spirit. What do you get in Luke? Blessed are the poor, period. End of sentence. So there is a great deal of, I think, attention given to the poor, but also a great deal of attention given to inclusiveness. No slave or free, Greek nor Jew, male or female, yada, 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 yada. There is a move toward inclusiveness. And no, it's not specifically what, of course, I haven't really heard critical race theory defined very well, except that it's whatever somebody believes that I don't like. But there is a strong emphasis throughout the Bible, on the issue of inclusiveness, the effect of systems and structures on people, and how we deal with the poor. My prejudice is that if some of the people who are very upset about critical race theory ever seriously considered their Bibles, they probably wouldn't want that included either. There'd be a lot of libraries getting cleaned out of that too. But that's just my prejudice. I have other prejudices, probably equally valid. I think that's it. We got 10 minutes. What about anything? Have I told you my Danny Young story? Some of you heard it.
Which one?
Oh, which one? How many of you knew Danny? Any of you know
I
Danny
knew
Young?
Danny.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the most unique human beings I have ever known in my entire life. Okay. The greatest natural born youth worker I have ever seen, ever. No training at all. None. Just an effervescent soul. Anyway, so we're at Mount Wesley, and it's the opening session of the youth weekend. I think the kids from because Tim Deschner was in the music team. So a bunch of our kids were there, and so it was my responsibility to read the rules, and I did. And then I said, "Are there any questions?" You can't be that general with Danny. He said, "I have a question," and I was stupid enough to call on him because I had to know that this was not going anywhere good for me. He said, "Yeah." He said, "I've got a question." He said, "How come it is that when you put a hat on and wear it for a long time, it doesn't feel like it's there anymore, but then when you take it off, it still feels like it's on your head?" And I'm going, okay. He said, well, you asked if he had any questions. That's my question. I thought, oh, okay. So whenever I say, I mean, it's a flashback. Anybody got any questions? And I thought, oh Lord, is there a Danny Young hiding somewhere in the audience? Because I've been there before. What else? Anybody seeing John's pictures of in Europe? Gee, I thought he said he wasn't going to make her walk a lot. He promised he wasn't going to make.
She took one day off.
Oh,
what I read.
good for him.
But the pictures are incredible.
Yes, they are. Yes,
especially
they are.
In Barcelona.
Yeah, yeah. Although he did say, I'm not climbing that tower. I noticed that. Well, friends, if that's it, that's it.
Well, John, one
Yeah.
thing more. The thing I always remember about Danny was that T-shirt and that saying, "Love them all and let
Oh, yeah.
God sort them out."
Yep. Do you know where that came from originally?
No.
He was reading Soldier of Fortune magazine. And Soldier of Fortune magazine had a T-shirt that said, "Kill them all, let God sort them out." And
I never knew that.
Yeah, he told me that. I was in the Texadeli one time having the salad that used his mother's Russian dressing, and he told me that if you've never been in the Texadeli before it closed, the wall was covered with all kinds of plaques and stuff. Just, yeah. It was the most incredible funeral I have ever been a part of. The sanctuary was absolutely packed, and you had Lloyd Doggett, you had all these people, all these musicians that were friends of his.
I remember
My
that.
boyfriend came from Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the ones who'd been his kids came from far away.
Bob, help me remember. Bob, golly, member of the wedding ring class forever. Bob.
Oh, yeah.
So conservative, he absolutely.
Flowers?
No.
Bob Allen, Bob Folk.
It doesn't matter. Anyway, this guy was, made Attila look like a liberal. Okay, I mean he was conservative. Okay, he showed up for that time when Danny and I did that deal on country western music.
Yeah.
And he and Danny became close friends. And he was at the funeral. And I remember saying, look around this crowd, because this bunch will never be in the same place at the same time again. And it was all around one person. That's all you need to know. Well, friends and neighbors, it's been fun. Stay out of trouble.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll do
so
this
much.
again someday.
Yeah.
Oh, listen, this is fun.
Well, this has been just such a treat.
Well,
Yes.
it's fun.
It's
It's
great.
yeah. I think we need to have stuff like this as often as possible, just to clear out the pipes, if nothing else.
So do you want to meet next week, John?
Do what?
Do you want to meet next week?
No, not next week. Holy Week. I'll take Holy Week off. We'll do
Monday,
that.
Thursday, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
You probably won't do anything on Monday, Thursday. The first time I preached at St. Matthew's, Merrill Wade called me and said, "I want you to preach for me." I said, "Okay, when are you going to preach?" He said, "I want you to preach Monday, Thursday." I said, "What?" I said, I wouldn't let, somebody wanted to preach on one of my holy days, he'd have to get in there with a gun. That's just not going to happen. He said, "Well, you got to understand, this is an hour and a half and 2-hour service, and I'm doing most of it. And I just don't want to have to deal with that too." And I mean, it was preaching, Eucharist, foot washing, and then a prayer in the garden afterward. I mean, it was 2 hours long.
Wow.
And it was wonderful. I mean, it reminds me very much, and then I'll quit, but of the Good Friday service. What's the good-
Traore.
Traore. Thank you. And the first time anybody said that to me, I said, "What? We're doing what? We're going to do 3 hours? We can't get Methodists to sit for over 45 minutes to 50 minutes. So we're going to go 3 hours." And a bunch of you, I know Noble was a big fan of it because he was there all the time, but, and Burgers had to sing in the choir all the time, but it was a incredibly fast 3 hours. And there was something about setting aside the time. In other words, the name of the service is what's important about it. It's 3 hours, you know? And there was time to think in the middle of Holy Week.
Well, John,
Duh.
like you said, John, it was the segments were
Yeah.
really, really well put together. The segments, you had the music, you had the scripture, you had the brief homily.
Yeah.
And then you had time to meditate. There was and it just to me, it just flew by. I mean, it just, the most startling thing was the pounding on the cross.
Oh,
Yeah.
gee.
Jeez. Uh-huh.
Yeah. That one, the first time that happens, it's a shocker. And yet, when you know it's happening, especially the people in the congregation, now the choir and the preachers had an edge because they could see what was happening up in the balcony.
Well, I could see it, but it's still, I jumped every time the hammer hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. See, there's something about sacrament done well. Good drama, good sacrament is drama. It is. When you hold the bread up, it's drama. Okay. We've gone. It's 8 o'clock. You're free to go.
John, we're real glad you and John hung around after you didn't have to.
We got no place to go.
Thank you,
We're
John.
glad you're here. We're
Thank
glad you're
you.
here.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.